Welcome to the Geek Homeworld podcast. I'm your host, Ed, aka the Savage Tech Man. We talk film, TV, and tech, all from a geek perspective. You can find us on X, Instagram, Facebook, and you can subscribe and follow on YouTube at Geek Homeworld. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Be a part of the Geek Homeworld. Hello, everyone. Just a few minutes late getting here. Another Saturday night. It is March 30th, 2024, and it is tomorrow's the 31st, so we've got one more day left in the month. And I'm here on the Geek Homeworld podcast. I'm Ed Ciucevich, your host of the Geek Homeworld podcast. And the title of this episode's Geek Homeworld episode 171, Livestream, Fire Made Flesh. So this is the episode where we're talking about the X-Men 97 Disney Plus series, which thoroughly enjoying at this point. It's almost close to perfect. I don't think we could really ask for much more. And in a day and age when Disney and other studios can't seem to get their IPs correct and just, unite the fandom, so far this has been the highest rated Disney Plus series. It was around 100%, teetering between that and 97%. And everybody is loving it so far. It hasn't gone like woke, really. I mean, it feels like a continuation of the animated series, which I have always held in high regard. And definitely so because it's just a well done series, and with the new animation, everything has just been really updated very well, and the storylines still have that punch to them. The first two episodes were phenomenal, and this third episodes drop Wednesday morning Eastern time or whatever. I don't know, because of daylight savings, if we're Eastern Standard, I never could understand what it is, but it's 3 a.m. here on the East Coast, midnight on the West Coast, and so that means usually I can't come on here right after, and because it's 3 or 4 in the morning, and so I'm not going to do that. I need my rest, like any person. But as soon as I can, usually Saturday's a good time for me where I can just get on here and just chit-chat about it. So that's what we're here to do. And Disney, like I said, has done a really good job so far that I can tell of this series, and I've really enjoyed it. And it's still got the political punch that X-Men was known for. And it's just a lot of really good storytelling. I'll tell you in a future episode what my secret drink is, and it's not unsweetened tea, not this time. But anyway, so there's a lot to talk about. And while I'm yapping here, I want to pull up an article just so I make sure that I don't get it wrong here. I'm just I got so much stuff on my computer blue. Let's see, where is it? If I was looking for something, I should have printed this out or had it handy. Actually, I may have, or did I can't tell. I think I may have. 1 second. I will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Talk to yourselves. Yep. Very well prepared for this live stream, as you can tell. I usually do these on the fly. I was going to have Digital Caveman. Wasn't able to make it. He's behind on some of his video uploads and his video production schedule, so he wasn't able to be here. But we talked extensively during the week about this latest episode of X-Men, and they did change some things from it, from the storyline on it. So, that being said, there's, the modifications aren't bad. Oh, by the way, first off, before I get into it, this is completely full of spoilers. So if you have not, had a chance to see any of the episodes, at least through episode 3, that's all that's out. But if you've not seen any of them, there will be spoilers. So I don't want you to be confused about that or anything. Sorry, I'm just looking through some of my notes here, something I pulled up on the internet. But yeah, so if you have not seen the episodes, please check and see about that, and before you watch this. And okay, interesting. Okay, that's that. Alrighty, I printed out stuff for school for my schoolwork. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. That was me putting the paper straight here, but I printed out some stuff there for school, and then just a little confused there with the other stuff I printed out. Very good drink. I'm enjoying it. So anyway, here's a synopsis, and I pulled this up from Wikipedia, so I'm sure everything is perfectly correct in here, right? This is not what I'm looking for in the episode list here, because I wanted to give the official synopsis of it. I could pull it up on my Disney Plus app, but there we go. All right. So X-Men 97. This is Fire Made Flesh, which is the 3rd episode, directed by E.M.I. Yonemura, and Bo DeMeo wrote it along with Charlie Feldman. And Bo DeMeo, he wrote the first 2 episodes, To Me by X-Men and Mutant Liberation Begins. If you're up with any of the news and the media, you know that he got let go abruptly right before the premiere of the first episode, and still haven't really said how or why, and we're not really here to get into all that, because we don't really know much, so I don't want to comment on something I really don't know a bunch about. So, anyway, this debuted Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and this is the, from Wikipedia, this is the description of episode 3, Fire Made Flesh. It says, quote, "The X-Men take in a Jean lookalike who Beast determines is the real Jean Grey." Now, that was a bit of a twist. So the big what if is of this whole episode is that all along, possibly even through the entire series, we don't know when Sinister, right at the end of the episode, Jean and Madeline Pryor, the clone, we find out essentially Scott has been with Madeline Pryor the whole time. So possibly this entire animated series, or a good portion of it, at least from after a couple season episodes in, basically we've had Jean Grey's clone. So did she become Phoenix? And they leave it kind of wide open in the end, and it was irritating me, but actually I thought about it and I was like, no, it's actually that's a pretty good cliffhanger. Whether they're going to wrap that up later or not, I don't know, but yeah, so we get this clone that shows up at the end of episode 2, Mutant Liberation Begins, and when we get into episode 3, Fire Made Flesh, they start off with that, of course, and so it's just kind of crazy. We find out that Sinister had both Jean and created this clone, because, he is, if you know anything about Mr. Sinister, he's been around, he's Nathaniel Essex. That's his name, and his origin goes back to the 1800s. And he did a lot of gene splicing and stuff like that, and he is genetically cloned himself several times. I think in the current run of the comics, he's Mr. Sinister, of course, and which is one of my favorite villains. So seeing him as an acolyte of Apocalypse makes it even more interesting. But there's some things about in this episode that they kind of mess up a little bit. It's not bad though, but like where Apocalypse gives a techno-organic virus to Cable in the comics, here Mr. Sinister doesn't, and maybe they did it for the storyline to make him, even more prescient as the bad guy. I don't know, but I don't mind that little alteration to the storyline. So anyway, we have let me read the rest of this, okay? So the X-Men taking Jean in the Jean lookalike, who Beast determines is the real Jean. Mr. Sinister contacts the other Jean, which is really creepy, through a baby monitor. It was really creepy, very scary. This could have been a Halloween episode. Fire Made Flesh. It was that good. Mr. Sinister contacts the other Jean, revealing her to be a clone he created, before asserting control over her and turning her into the Goblin Queen. She kidnaps Nathan. That's the baby. Not to be confused with Nathaniel Essex. Nathaniel Essex is Mr. Sinister, but Nathan is essentially Nathan Summers, and he becomes Cable, which is one of my favorite superheroes, or X-Men. Anyway, so the Goblin Queen kidnaps baby Nathan and hands him off to Mr. Sinister before subjecting the X-Men to horrific visions until Jean confronts her telepathically, during which she reminds Madeline of their shared memories. Morph leads the X-Men to one of Sinister's labs, where they find him infecting baby Nathan with a techno-organic virus under the belief that it will turn him into the ultimate mutant. So essentially, Sinister can transfer his essence into baby Cable there, or baby Nathan, or whatever. And free of Sinister's control, the clone turns Madeline turns on Sinister, but Nathan, baby Nathan, is left gravely ill. The clone and Cyclops take Bishop they task Bishop with taking Nathan to the future, which in this timeline is 2555 or 2055, I think. And then, of course, it's 3999 where Cable goes in the comics. The Askani tribe is where he's taken into the future, and it gets convoluted, but The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix if you have not read in the comics, that's a good run in the comics that you could that really gives a good breakdown of this whole story. And excuse me, but I think it involves Rachel. Is it Rachel? I'm getting the name wrong. I know I'm getting the name wrong, but it's essentially Nathan Summers' younger or older, younger sister who's in the future. I think that because of time travel, everything's kind of backwards and sideways. But he gets to the Askani tribe, and they take care of Cable until he can learn to, use part of his telepathic abilities that he has from Jean and all that from his mom, which it looks like is the Goblin Queen or Madeline Pryor. And he has to constantly use his a portion of his telekinetic powers to keep that techno-organic virus at bay, because if he doesn't, it'll consume his entire body and I guess kill him or whatever. And so later on, it splinters off to where I think Apocalypse creates a clone of Cable in the future. He creates a clone of him, and he is free of the techno-organic virus, so he is actually more powerful clone of Nathan Summers or Cable. And he his name is Strife, and there's a good storyline in that too. We could go on and on a lot of things. But anyway, so Bishop takes Nathan to the future in hopes of finding a cure. Afterwards, the clone leaves the X-Men, taking the name Madeline Pryor. Meanwhile, Storm meets with Forge, who tells her he can restore her powers. So we get a younger version of Forge, and he is from Cable's future in the 2055, 2255, 2555, whatever that. It's in the 2200s or something. It's in not Cable's lifetime, Bishop's timeline. And I was watching a video from New Rockstars channel on YouTube, and they were talking about this whole episode, and they said this could be a what if kind of, which would really turn things on its ear, that maybe this isn't the actual timeline, this is like a branch timeline or something. Since the MCU is, into all that multiverses and stuff, I wouldn't put it past them. That would make this an interesting storyline. But so far, I'm loving the storyline, so I am enthralled. This is like a good soap opera. But so we have what's coming up. We have 10 episodes in this season, so they're going to be gone before you know it. So we had To Me, My X-Men, which is March 20th. It also dropped with the episode 2, Mutant Liberation Begins, so that was fantastic. We were spoiled rotten last week or whatever. And this week on the 27th of March, we got episode 3, Fire Made Flesh. Now, coming April 3rd, we get episode 4, which is Motendo / Life Death Part 1. So, interesting, okay? It's one episode, but it's like, I think that's one episode. It could be 2 episodes, but the Motendo is going to be Mojo Vision, so Mojo World. So, if you remember from the comics, it's kind of like Mojo's this entity, essentially, and everything is like televised, and they were part of the animated series. It was on there, and we see it's like where they're put into like these games and they're on television. Everything's televised, so it's like a what do you call it? One of those real life TV shows or whatever, it's supposed to be, but it's everything in the future's on television essentially in this iteration of Mojo World. And so everybody's competing in different things like gladiatorial type of games and such. So it's a bit of that going on, and there's a lot of things going on in that situation like that with the what's happening in Mojo World, and we have Motendo, so it sounds like there's going to be some play off of Nintendo. That's been hinted at. I don't know, so I'm interested to see where this episode goes. But it says / Life Death Part 1, Life Death Part 1, and that's like one word, Life Death. So I think that's going to be something to do with Madeline Pryor. Maybe she's going to die. They're going to work out the whole Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor thing. And what worries me is how fast they are blowing through these episodes. So I don't know. I hope this breakneck speed, it works good, but they can really spend time like, X-Men, the animated series, did spend time and spread out over different episodes, different parts. Like, I think the Dark Phoenix saga was like 4 episodes at least, maybe 5. And so, there's different ones that they've done. And so I hope they're not rushing through everything here. So anyway, we get Motendo / Life Death Part 1, April 3rd. Then we have one called Remember It. And that's the 5th episode coming April 10th. And I want to say the name is Gambit. Remember It. I think he says something like that in the animated series, because I have all these stuck in my head because I've watched the animated series, all 6 seasons, like millions of times probably. Because to me, they're the quintessential version of X-Men. It was the one that I was most exposed to first, and I knew of the X-Men before I really got into the animated series, but I was hooked from like day one. And a lot of people, their entry into X-Men was X-Men the animated series. So we have Remember It, episode 5 dropping April 10th. Then April 17th we have Life Death Part 2. So they're going to leave us probably on a cliffhanger. Then the next week do a totally different, maybe standalone episode, or maybe ties into the overall story arc of things. I don't know. But then we're going to end up with Bright Eyes, which could be a Cyclops related episode. I'm not sure. That comes out April 24th. Then we have 8, 9, and 10, May 1st, May 8th, and May 15th. Those are Tolerance is Extinction. So part 1, part 2, and part 3. So I feel like that's going to bring this whole season together. And, some of the standouts from the series so far of X-Men 97 has been Magneto's trial in episode 2, where just the speech that he gives before the UN or whatever in his trial or whatever is very powerful. And the writers, you can tell, they're doing a fantastic job at this show. Everybody involved so far. So some of the elements that we have, let's see, I'm just looking at my notes here. So we have this lookalike that comes in Fire Made Flesh episode 3 of X-Men 97, and we're led to believe, you think it's Madeline Pryor, but then he determines that no, this is the real Jean Grey. So where has Jean Grey been? Has Sinister had her this whole time and she finally escaped? Or, I'm sure they're going to tell us, hopefully. And then Madeline Pryor's, basically, why did Mr. Sinister, kidnap Jean and all that? Well, he wanted to get her DNA, and then Scott, if you remember from the animated series, and because he wanted to make a clone, and he wanted essentially to get their DNA, knowing the Jean Grey, Scott Summers DNA, as powerful as she is as a telepath and everything, Jean Grey is, and as powerful as Scott is with his, optic blast and such, just their genetic makeup could create maybe the perfect mutant or a very powerful one that he would essentially transfer his essence into, which is something Sinister has done through cloning and all that, kind of like Emperor Palpatine has done, as we find out now. Anyway, and Apocalypse, of course, did, transfer his essence into a new, younger body. So that way they can kind of live forever and, more or less. And anyway, so Mr. Sinister created the Jean Grey knockoff Madeline Pryor, the clone, so she could get with Scott and have a child, and then that child is Nathan Summers, and then he would, he would take the child, and eventually it would be who he would put his essence into, and it's a really sinister plan, for lack of a better word, right? Mr. Sinister believes in, he's around the time of Charles Darwin, so he believes in what Apocalypse believes in, the survival of the fittest, but he believes of natural selection. Is that what you call it? Basically the strong will survive. Those that can mutate or whatever can become stronger. They'll rise up to the top of the food chain and survive, and so kind of a survival of the fittest thing. And that's what Sinister is all about. And let's see. There's really when a very poignant moment in the episode is when Jean is, or actually it's Madeline Pryor, when she's telepathically implanting memories into Nathan Summers, baby Nathan, into his consciousness or whatever, for him to probably discover later in his life, of how she loved him and she didn't abandon him, but they had no choice but to send him into the future. Scott, when this is going on and they make that decision that Nathan is going to die, he's not going to make it unless Bishop takes him to see Forge in Bishop's future, because technology is far advanced at that point, and in that way, he'll be able to preserve, save Nathan Summers' life. So, baby Nathan would be okay then. And then, he could bring him back to this timeline and this and that. Now, in the Adventures of Cyclops in the Phoenix limited series, they found a way to bring Jean Grey and Scott Summers into their essence into the future, kind of what they did in the reverse in Days of Future Past and the Fox movie, the X-Men Days of Future Past, where they took Wolverine's essence and sent it to his 1970s body or whatever, in the time, because I guess going from the 90s to the 70s, whatever it was, sent him back in the past essentially. And so actually it was later than the 90s, because this is in the far future, X-Men Days of Future Past. So it's the same procedure, more or less. It's just in reverse. So in the Cyclops and Jean Grey limited series, they do that. Now I don't know if they're going to do that in X-Men 97. I'm not sure yet. So don't really know about that. We have that going, but when she's saying goodbye to baby Nathan, it's a really poignant moment. It's really kind of hard hitting, and all that. So I mean, this was a good episode. It's a little darker for my taste, but when you're dealing with Mr. Sinister, you kind of have to be. That's kind of how this goes, and so I thought that was a very good is a very good episode. I've saw people online saying that it was almost the perfect episode, and some people were like, "Oh, we're going to see Mephisto in here," when they went essentially into the Inferno storyline, which is from the comics. And we didn't see Mephisto. Everybody has been wanting to see Mephisto. I could care less if we see Mephisto, but whatever. It still was good storytelling, and we have everything where essentially Madeline has this ability to make people see stuff that isn't there. So they were seeing zombies coming out of the TV, and Bishop, when they were fell into this inferno or hell or whatever you want to call it, created by Madeline Pryor or whatever. They the Goblin Queen. He sees his sister Shard, why have you left us? Why are you still in the past? Why have you abandoned us, Bishop? So they're messing with everybody's head. So they find different ways to mess with different people's heads. And Jean Grey comes in and saves everybody psychically or whatever. And then she gets on the astral plane, and I won't say doing battle. She's doing, if anything, she's trying to comfort Madeline Pryor, which they don't know her as that. She's just the Jean Grey clone at this point until the end of the episode. Where they have a really nice parting of ways, Jean and her, because she leaves at the end of the episode. Madeline does, and she said, "Call me Madeline Pryor," and Jean is just so naturally kind of loving and giving that way. Her character's just always been like that. So, but the pivotal point in that conversation is something I mentioned earlier. They don't know, the clone, Madeline Pryor or Jean Grey, they don't know when Sinister, neither of them can figure out when Sinister switched them, because their memories are all kind of intertwined. And essentially Jean's memories, they could tell genetically from the scan early on that Madeline was newer and Jean was older, but the older Jean didn't have her memories were kind of splintered and stuff like that. So, it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating story. So I don't know if it's very, very good. I mean, in this series, I have to give it to Disney. They've not hit 1,000 on a lot of things, and they've messed with some timelines, messed some stuff up, and even Fox. No one has a perfect record on any of this. When you're dealing with 70-something years or however long it's been for the X-Men that's been out, it's easy to say that it's easy to mess things up and not be able to pull every timeline and continuity together. And Fox was notorious for that. And with their X-Men movies, even though they were enjoyable, but I think they did probably the best they could with the limits of technology and budgets they had back then. Much more opportunities now in the grand scheme of things. But so when we're talking about how true is X-Men 97 to the comics, other than a few things I pointed out in this episode, kind of right on track, even comic book accurate. Their costumes, the one thing that still bothers me a little bit, and I mentioned it last episode, was, and couldn't be helped, but I'm glad she's there to not be there, but the voice actors, your voice changes over time, and the lady who does Rogue, she's doing that Southern kind of accent, that Southern Belle kind of accent that Rogue always has. Something that was missing in, Rogue in the X-Men TV series. I understand they had to change some things, but I didn't like that portrayal of Rogue as well. As this is my quintessential Rogue that we have on the X-Men the animated series and then X-Men 97. But anyway, as I was saying before, the actress that does the voice, it almost sounds like a Southern child or something. It's like, it sounds like an older person trying to sound younger, and that's exactly, limitations of your voice, and it's been 30-something years since, X-Men, the animated series. So, of course, your voice is going to change, but we even have a different voice actor, I believe, for Cyclops, because the gentleman that did that passed away, but that voice actor sounds so much like the actor that originally did Scott Summers' Cyclops character. So, great job there in the voice work, definitely, and all around. And I'm not knocking the Jean Grey voice actor, but it's taken me a while to get kind of used to the difference in her voice. And we're not going to even talk about how she's drawn digitally. I don't have a problem with that. Some people are losing their minds over it. Oh, they, flatten down the ladies, and if you know what I mean, they're not as curvy. But that's how they were drawn back then in the 90s and before that, but I don't mind that as much, as long as you don't fundamentally change everything about the character. And we talked about that in the previous episode, so a lot of things you might want to go and listen to the previous episodes, and you'll find out whether you agree or disagree. And we certainly would love your comments on that. Now, talking about X-Men 97, it's about as close to perfect as, even if, if I was doing the show, I don't think of many ways that I would improve it. I mean, I think they're knocking it out of the park. And for Disney Plus, for Disney in general, this is definitely a win they should take, because they don't have as many as they used to. And I just don't want them to fundamentally change what's in X-Men 97, since it's a continuation. You've got the same characters, but you're continuing the story. And it's based in the 90s, so we have to have those 90s sensibilities, because don't call it X-Men 97 and then come at it with 2024 thoughts and opinions. Woke stuff isn't going to work well in a setting like this. Woke in a bad way, I mean. And, but, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but, we talked before about the non-binary of classification of morph. If you picked any genre, any superhero title or whatever that you wanted to discuss something like that, X-Men would be the place, and Morph would be the perfect character for it. Being shapeshifter, you see him. Funny part in this third episode, Fire Made Flesh. He's like, hands up if you something, and he said something hilarious, and in the next scene they show him, and he's got 6 hands up, because he turns into Spiral from Mojo Vision, the female character there. And then later on he turns into Magic, and then Madeline Pryor does this cool thing, the Goblin Queen. She transforms Morph from being Magic, which is Ileana Rasputin, Colossus's younger sister, who in the comics had the legacy virus and all that was their version of AIDS that was killing mutants in the comics. But anyway, so Morph transforms into magic, and then she turns her Goblin Queen. Madeline Pryor turns her into like a more kind of almost demonic version of magic, and all that. So the mind power that she's exerting upon these people, like they're in the mansion and it's like stuff coming out the TV at them and those weird shapes. Like I'm telling you, the Mr. Sinister part where you start hearing his voice when Madeline's with baby Nathan in the nursery, and you start hearing his voice. And it sounds like they recorded it, through a baby monitor, and they showed a baby monitor. That reminds me of Signs, when you can hear the little, sounds of the aliens talking. But it's very scary, very creepy. And then they show Mr. Sinister eventually. That's when he reveals himself to Madeline, and she essentially transforms into the Goblin Queen and kidnaps baby Nathan, and then, uses her whatever powers that she has, and they're fighting, and it's just awesome. It's such a mind game battle going on there. It's pretty awesome. And we see one of the funniest parts, and this could all be, just in their heads, but Morph and Wolverine are about to go to the danger room when all this is going down with Goblin Queen. And Morph is looking through who's and what times they're going to be in the danger room, and he kept scrolling through it, and it's Rogue and Magneto. He said Rogue must be working on her stamina with Magneto because they were kind of showed that they could touch. So and people want to know that how is he able to touch Rogue? Because when Rogue touches anybody's skin, she absorbs that power. She hangs on too long, like Miss Marvel in the animated series and in the comics. She absorbs all of her power. Essentially puts the person in a coma. Like, if you remember from the X-Men films, Rogue talks about she kissed her first boyfriend and put him in a coma for 3 weeks or something like that, or 3 months or whatever. And so, Rogue has to live without the touch of another human being. So what is that like? That's got to be pretty traumatic. And then there was in the Age of Apocalypse, which is a wonderful series. I've got the whole thing in my comic book collection right over. I'm pointing to it right over there if you're watching the video here on YouTube. But Magneto, what he does is he creates a very thin magnetic field around his entire body. So he could feel the sensation, and Rogue can, of them touching each other, but it's not enough to... It's enough protection for Magneto that he doesn't get his powers drained or any of his essence drained. So we see, one of the big relationships is always been, of course, Scott and Jean, Cyclops and Phoenix, Jean Grey. But there's also been Remy LeBeau, Gambit, and Rogue. And so we see Gambit in this episode getting jealous of the fact that they're in there in the danger room for all that time, and then it opens up and they're like very scantily clad, and I'm like, that's one thing about this series. I know the animated series of X-Men was it had a little bit of adultness to this. This one definitely is more anchored towards adults or young adults than kids. Sensibilities have changed since the 90s, so I understand that, but I'm not knocking the tone at all. It actually works. It's a very, very good show. It's very well written. For an animated series, I'm impressed in so many ways. I have to work really hard to find something I dislike or I think has been wrong in these first 3 episodes. And what a great feeling that is, knowing how much I love the X-Men and grew up with them, and to see, especially when someone like Disney gets a hold of it and they're actually doing it right, so everybody involved in this show really put their heart and soul in it. It's such a love letter to the original fans like myself. So I really appreciate that. The care and painstaking and the Easter eggs and stuff that they've put in there really pulls you in. So basically everybody's getting mind bleeped by the Goblin Queen until Jean telepathically comes in there, and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to say does battle with. She just, in her own way, she's very considerate of what the Goblin Queen's gone through. Can you imagine being a clone and finding out you're a clone? There's just a bunch of craziness going on, a special level of crazy. But Jean's just such a good character. I remember back in the 90s, I guess it was the it was the 90s, Cyclops and Jean got married. There was a special comic book, and if I looked hard enough, I probably have it somewhere, as the wedding of Cyclops and Jean Grey, and it was really well done. And they teased a lot of that in some of the episodes in X-Men, especially the one with Mr. Sinister, where Morph is under the evil influence. They don't know that he's back yet. This is in the animated series. And he marries Scott and Jean, but then they find out later it was Morph all along, so they weren't technically married. And she goes, "But we're married in our hearts, Scott." That's so they have the melodramatic stuff. I tell you, it plays like a good soap opera if you go for that kind of thing. But if you don't like soap operas, you'll still love X-Men. It's got some killer action. Like, I think I'm finally realizing, it's kind of articulating some of my favorite hero of the whole group. I like all of them for their different traits and their character traits and their powers and stuff. But I was always a fan of Cyclops, Scott Summers, and because he's like a good guy. He knows where he stands. He's a team leader. He's just a natural born leader, tactician. He's a good hand-to-hand combat kind of fighter. But the thing I'd learned was his optic blast, and I always kind of wonder why it didn't incinerate people. But they're actually concussive force, so they're not actually lasers. Like Superman has lasers, coming from his eyes. Scott Summers, Cyclops, has concussive force, essentially concussive beams of light. And so he can control it. Like when he's fighting, the choreography of that is so great in the animation of X-Men 97, where he's fighting. They're fighting in the warehouse, and he's trying to save, essentially, Sunspots, the new character in there. And he's fighting, and he uses this concussive blast to push them to the other side of the room to get out of the way of the Sentinel beams and their little handheld laser guns that they had. The Friends of Humanity, which those are the bad guys. The FOH, Friends of Humanity. They're anti-mutants, and so mutants have always been and being outcast and downtrodden. That's what X-Men's about, and it's about standing up for people that can't stand up for their own. It's about people being allowed isn't the right word. I'm not sure what the word is, but people having their right to exist, and if they believe differently. Like, I don't know if you caught it in episode 2, Mutant Liberation Begins, but at Magneto's trial, I challenge anybody to go watch that and listen to his speech. His speech is so good. And he starts off talking about, because if you know anything about him from the comics and you've seen the live Fox movies, that he was him and his parents were in a concentration camp. He's Jewish. And he starts off, one of his speeches, he says in X-Men 97, Magneto says, just because we called God by a different name is one reason, when will we ever be good enough for you humans? Because he's addressing the UN and, for his crimes against humanity and all that. But he said, I've only ever done what I needed to do to protect mutants, to protect our rights. And so, very, very much always powerful, the X-Men, the subjects, they do a brilliant job in the animated series and in X-Men 97, and just walking that thin line, essentially, because everything goes haywire at his trial, Magneto's trial at the UN, and the Friends of Humanity come in, and Executioner comes in, and he blasts Storm, and she takes the fall for Magneto. I mean, she jumps in front of the blast from the Executioner, and essentially it obliterates her power. And earlier in that episode, we got to see Jean, or the episode before, To Me, My X-Men, when they're fighting the Sentinels, and she just goes super Omega level crazy on the Sentinels, and she's totally kicking butt, and that's just what she does. But to see her power stripped away, that was another powerful moment, and in the series so far, X-Men '97, and so to see that display of power and and Magneto speaking to all that was just vitally important. And when we come back to it, we see that we'll come back to it. I guess the next episode we'll see Forge helping her, helping Jean get her powers back. So hopefully that happens. Hopefully it's done really well so far. I've got no complaints on this series. I really can't think of much. There is one little questionable moment where Morph sees, like, whether it's induced by the Goblin Queen, but like, I didn't know if they were going to go there, and I'm kind of glad they didn't. But I think he's got a crush on Wolverine or something, because he sees him like in the steam of the shower or something. It's just like one frame, and I'm like, okay, well, what are they doing here? And then they go on to something else. So it's Sinister and the Goblin Queen playing with their minds, essentially. So there's that. But it's a well done episode, well written. Everything is just really well out there. So I can't give you a higher recommendation for X-Men '97 if you haven't watched it. And I spoke to some that said they hadn't really watched it. They only really know the movies, or or know a little bit here, know a little bit there. That's the thing. But it's legitimate. But you really could watch this series even if you didn't know much about the X-Men. You just generally knew about the X-Men. I think you'd really enjoy it. And so what else is there that I want to talk about? Fire Made Flesh. What are my expectations? Well, I the way we've been going this breakneck speed on these episodes, they kind of wrap up storylines. Like, I think they chewed through in the first couple episodes at least 2 or 3 different things, and sometimes I'm used to seeing it kind of multi-episode arcs, but it seems like they're blowing through this stuff at a pretty quick pace, and I am not complaining at all. Not at all. I'm enjoying it either way. However it hits, however it comes, I am all there for this show. I mean, X-Men '97, I could not ask for anything better than what we've got. They've done such a great job with just pulling all this together. It just really feels, it's very rewarding. So I'm very excited for the direction of this show. The execution of it has been, executioner, no pun intended, but the execution to all this has been very good and all that. Just putting something in the chat there. Hi, everyone. I cannot complain at all. I'm super stoked, super excited for the rest of this season. It's going to go by so quickly, though, but I'm probably going to go in when I'm done with this. I'll upload the episodes and all this. This live stream will go up to YouTube. Well, it's already there, but I'll fine tune it a little bit, and then I'll put the podcast episode up wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to the audio version of this. That'll be up there. I'll get all that done, and I'll probably go watch X-Men. I might watch all 3 episodes. I don't know. They're just so awesome. Overall, for the series, I said in the last episode we did here that talking about Scott, Cyclops finally getting his due, being that badass leader that he's always been. I'm excited that that's how they're doing things, and they're really handling this series well, and I'm just really excited about the direction of things and how it's going. So I cannot complain whatsoever about that. So what else do I want to talk about? Well, since it's just me on the stream here on this episode hosting, I'm just going to kind of cut it short because I think I said everything I kind of want to say about it. There's probably more. Once I cut the mic, I always think of something I want to say. Usually happens after I'm done talking ad nauseum at times about things, talking a lot. So, but anyway, for any of those out there celebrating Easter and all that, happy Easter. Let's hope it's a time of renewal for everyone, and we can get together and be more united in not just this country but this world. That's a hope, something I hope for and look forward to. And if we learn anything from watching X-Men, the animated series, X-Men 97, or any of the X-Men comics or the films that have been out, it's about not just tolerating others, but accepting others, and not always people that think and believe the same way that we do. So, let's all be a little bit more united in things. That would be nice. So this has been Geek Homeworld episode 171. We're September coming up, 2024 will be 10 years I've been doing the podcast episode here, and not even a quarter of that has been on the YouTube version of it. So if you're wondering where all the episodes are, they're on the podcast side, but on the audio side. But anyway, so this is Fire Made Flesh, our live stream episode here, episode 171 of the Geek Homeworld podcast. I'm your host, Ed Ciucevich, and please leave us your comments. I'd love if you go into the channel, subscribe, even enable notifications. That way when we have another live stream or another episode coming or any content on this channel on YouTube, you'll know. Of course, you subscribe to the podcast feed. I'll usually put all these into podcast form as well. Plus, excuse me. I said plus, we have the static audio version on YouTube. I know some people say that's cheating in YouTube, but I do have the live stream version, so if you want to watch it. But sometimes if you're like me, you're doing chores or other things and you just want to listen to podcasts in the background, so that's good for that. But it's on YouTube as an audio version with just a static, our logo up there for Geek Homeworld. So if you just want to listen on YouTube, or you can listen to your podcast app if that's how you choose to listen to podcasts. I know I do both. So I've got so many audio podcasts. I've got episodes with college and everything. It's just been very busy and just trying to keep up and trying to figure out what the world, just get everything done. In fact, I just took a break from schoolwork so I could just have a little fun, enjoy my life a little bit along the way, and get in here and do a quick live stream podcast episode here for you. Excuse me. Then I've got to get back and cracking the books again. So I don't know if I'll get to them tonight, but definitely tomorrow I'm going to do some. Tomorrow's Easter Sunday, so in a few hours. So I'm excited for that. It's a good time. I love this spring time of year, other than the pollen that's killing me. It makes life a little bit miserable. It's a nice time of like rebirth and renewal, and so this Easter season is good for that. And so anywho, thank y'all for listening, however and wherever you listen or watch us, or both or all of the above. Please subscribe, enable notifications on the YouTube, and give a thumbs up to our videos. It helps with the algorithm somehow. I'm slowly growing this YouTube version of the podcast, this side of the podcast. So I'm always looking for interesting people that want to come on. I can StreamYard you in, or I used to say Skype you in, but whatever. I'd used Skype in years. But I can bring you on as a guest, or maybe even, on the show or whatever. If you ever have comments, please feel free to leave them in here. Even after this episode is up and published, you can certainly go and watch it, leave that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and heck even, go in the chat and leave some comments, and we'll try to respond to what you got. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Take care, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Geek Homeworld with your host, Ed Ciucevich. Thanks, and goodbye. Thanks for listening to another exciting episode of the Geek Homeworld podcast with your host, Ed. aka the Savage Tech Man. Remember to follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for being a part of the Geek Homeworld.